Good afternoon, everybody from San Francisco, and we are going to present our reimbursement workshop. So let me make sure my screen is being shared here. So we are Focus Academy, as Nori mentioned to you. We're based in downtown San Francisco. So I'm just going to go through a brief overview of what Focus Academy offers. Just to let everybody know that this is being recorded, and so the recording of this session will be available through Jetro after this workshop in the next couple of days. So I'm going to talk a little bit about U.S. healthcare, just a brief overview that I think will be beneficial for you in the future, looking at reimbursement. And then I'm going to pass it over to one of our senior advisors, Susan Rowinsky, who's going to focus on the important aspects of reimbursement in the U.S. Following that, we'll then be speaking with Regina Liang, who's going to present her inputs and based on her experience, looking at some case studies. And then finally, we'll be finishing up the program with Andrew Broderick, who's our research director here at Focus. And he's going to talk in more detail and have a discussion around his experience with digital health technologies and some of his recent experience working in the aging tech community. And then finally, we'll have a discussion, and please submit your questions, and hopefully we will get to cover as much as possible. So Focus Academy is an innovation hub. We're based in downtown San Francisco. Some of you are familiar with us. We've been working with Jetro for the last number of years, running the GAH program for health and med tech and clean technologies. We are based in very much right downtown, very close to the Salesforce Tower that you can see there. We focus on international projects and international commercialization in the US. So we work with a lot of accelerators, government agencies like Jetro, and we also run workshops, immersion programs, boot camps, and one-to-one development mentoring sessions for companies. As we're doing with the GAH. Our approach is kind of a very tailored way of working with groups. This is an example of a group from Argentina that spent 2 weeks with us here in San Francisco. And what we were able to do for each individual company was to develop a very specific tailored program that gave them a very rapid access to our very broad and deep network here in the Bay Area. We also provide not just consultancy services, but we also provide laboratory space. So a lot of companies will come to us having been through an accelerator program. It gives them a chance to curtail their expenditure while they're trying to raise more funds, but they can still continue working on their science. And so a lot of companies are still in the prototype or very early stages of development. We partner with other labs throughout the country and provide space as needed. And obviously conference rooms, phone booths, shared amenities are all very valuable in our co-working space in downtown San Francisco, which we hope we can invite you to come meet us at in the coming months. One of our specific agencies that we've developed, or centers of excellence, is around aging research and accessibility. We've actually worked with a number of amazing companies from Japan that are very focused on aging, and our whole focus is really connecting the customers to the technologists so that those products can be developed in the best way possible. For us, the product market is very, very important, product market fit and user-centered design. And so we've developed a very strategic application or approach to developing these products and working with collaborators throughout the US. The US landscape, I'm going to talk very, very briefly about this, but there has been quite a change, as you know. COVID has certainly made telemedicine a very new opportunity that's really rapidly increased. We've also had a difference in how we deliver care to the community. We're looking at new apps for everything from medication management to home diagnostics and monitoring, and then retail clinics So the Walgreens and the CVSs are now being used. I'm sorry, is there?
Sorry.
Hey, we can't see your screen.
Oh, you can't see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Can you see the slides?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, hang on a second.
Yes, we can see it now.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. So you haven't been able to see the slides at all?
Not
Yes.
really.
Thank you for letting me know. Hang on a second. Okay. So I was talking about our Center for Aging, the US landscape. As I was mentioning, there's been quite a change in the last couple of years. There's a lot more, the way that medicine is delivered is pretty, is rapidly changing. We're seeing retail clinics like CVS and Walgreens where they're actually doing diagnostics on site, delivery of vaccines, as we know, and also delivering or providing a one-stop shop for prescriptions and everything else that a household needs. Home diagnostics and monitoring has definitely been seen an increase in these applications, and some of the companies that we've worked with are in this digital healthcare space where we're delivering care remotely. Telemedicine is obviously something that's seen a big increase over the last number of months, particularly the last 18 months, dramatically increased in delivering care remotely. And these are all new ways to deliver your medical technology or healthcare innovation. Some interesting numbers that I think would be worth noting is that the US spend pretty much 50% of the world's healthcare spend is in the US. So obviously a lot of companies want to be here. The US spends about $3.8 trillion per year on healthcare, and that actually breaks down to about $10,000 per person. Here, I won't go through all of this, but I think what's really interesting is only 10% of that is out-of-pocket expenditure. Private insurance accounts for 34%. Medicare, which is the government-supported program for the over 65s, accounts for 20%. So knowing where this expenditure is going is pretty important when it comes to understanding how you will get paid for your technology. Eventually, obviously, knowing who your stakeholders is pretty important. The payers are a very, very important part of your stakeholder system, and getting to know them early on in the process. I think Susan will spend more time talking about that. The percentage of people with health insurance coverage from the last census is actually pretty dramatic in that most people have coverage at 90%. What's interesting is how that breaks down. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about TRICARE and what that is. Medicare, this is the public coverage for over 65s. That accounts for 18% of the population, and Medicaid, which is for the lower income, supporting folks who are living pretty much close or below the poverty line, accounts for 17%. So this is all important data when it comes to understanding who's going to pay for your products and how are you going to get them paid. I won't go through all of this because I think we actually are tight on time. I have a few minutes though. Private payers, folks in the US have their insurance paid privately sometimes, or as a large percentage of them are paid privately, and a lot of this comes from employment-based health insurance, own employment. Families also can engage in health insurance through their employers or their spouses' employers. There's also direct purchase of health insurance, and that's where the individual pays directly for it. The exchange plans incorporates the Obamacare that you're very familiar with. So there are states that are offering these supplemented programs so that more people have access to healthcare. And that's something that dramatically changed over the last number of years with the Obamacare plans. TRICARE is the military healthcare program, and that's for active duty and retired members of the uniformed services and their families and survivors. Public health insurance, you're familiar with CMS. Some of you will be very familiar with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. Thankfully, Susan has provided a really detailed overview of that program and how to work within its regulations, and a lot of detail covered in that handout that we provided prior to the workshop. So hopefully that will be very, very helpful to you. Medicare is for the over 65s, but there's multiple different types of programs within Medicare. And again, we can talk a little bit more in detail about these in the next set of talks. Medicaid, as I said, is a program administered at the state level for families with dependent children, aging, blind, and disabled. And so it really covers the most vulnerable in society and those who obviously do need and quite often have chronic conditions. CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program, and that's for capturing children from low-income families who do not qualify for Medicaid. So these are important programs to know about. CHAMP VA are the VA coverage. That's the Veterans Administration, and that covers vets who've obviously been in the armed forces and their dependents and survivors. And it's one of the biggest and largest insurers of individuals in the US that's publicly funded. State-specific plans, there are states that will have certain plans, and then the Indian Health Services are for the indigenous people, and this is a specific healthcare service that's provided by the Department of Health and Human Services. So these will all be available to you for future review. So now I'd like to introduce you to Susan Rowinsky, who, as I mentioned earlier, is our reimbursement specialist. Susan runs her own company. She is the CEO and president. Her prior appointments, she was on the teaching faculty at UCSF at one point in time, but she's also held various levels of marketing and reimbursement titles at a significant number of companies. So is very experienced, has a lot of very good hands-on experience of bringing products to market and making sure that they get paid for. She is consistently called on to advise boards. She also contributes to some of the NIH reviews, and she's on the faculty at the University of Michigan and Georgia Institute of Technology. So I'm going to hand it over to Susan, and apologies for the mix-up in my slides, but look forward to following up on questions after our next presentation. So let me hand it over to Susan.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and if somebody can just, let's see. Can people see the title screen?
Not yet.
Okay, it might just take a couple of minutes.
Guess we can now.
Okay, great. Okay, in the half hour I have with everyone, I'd like to speak with you regarding key concepts for your U.S. reimbursement planning efforts. Once again, my name is Susan Rowinsky. I'm president and CEO of Rowinsky Group, LLC. We are a reimbursement consultancy for medical technologies, and we are based in San Francisco. However, the people that work for the firm, and we can have upwards of 30 people, are based around the USA. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is an introduction to the firm. Specifically, Rowinsky Group uses healthcare payer and reimbursement data to help medical technology companies secure reimbursement. And we also use this data to help solve regulatory, clinical, sales, and marketing issues. Once again, for medical technologies under development that are for the US market. So we work with companies from all over the world, but their interest or their focus is the US market, and so is ours. Here are our core services. I'm not going to spend any time on that right now. And as Kate had mentioned, I specifically am a partner of the Focus Academy and do provide reimbursement and teaching assistance. Resources, I'll just spend 30 seconds on this. Everyone should have received the Innovator's Guide in Navigating Medicare Reimbursement. That's a tool you can use after this workshop is concluded. And likewise, on our website is consolidation of the myriad of stakeholders who are involved in determining a medical technology's reimbursement pathway. As Kate had mentioned, I teach a lot. And this particular resource page was set up specifically for my students, but as well as those who attend the workshops where I present. Regarding opportunities for questions, there will be a 10-minute Q&A following my presentation. And then should you have any questions after the conclusion of today's workshop, please email them to Kate at this address. So quickly, in terms of our agenda, I'm going to cover 3 items and then follow up with a question and answer session. I'm going to open up and say why reimbursement. I'd like to make an argument to you why reimbursement is important for U.S. commercial success, and then spend a little time talking about decisions that U.S. payers make that will affect your reimbursement plans. I'd like to wrap up with a very key reimbursement planning decisions that most companies need to make when entering the US. And then, like I said, that should leave us roughly 10 minutes for a Q&A session. So I'm going to open up why reimbursement is important for US commercial success. I'd like to go to this pictogram. And I'm going to break it down here for you. Medical technology company. This is everyone who is registered for this workshop. And you develop a medical technology and need to sell it into the US. And when you do sell it, you will be selling it to what we call facility clinical customers. These are your hospitals, ambulatory surgical centers, the medical office, depending on where your medical technology would be used. It is the facility customer who incurs costs. The costs are purchasing your product, providing the staff to use your product, your technology, the room, the utilities. Those are costs that they can incur for purchasing and using your medical technology. Likewise, you may need to sell your medical technology to what we call in the United States professional clinical customers. And your professional customers are physicians, physical therapists come to mind. These are people who are not involved in the purchase of your technology, but do use it. And when using it, expect to be reimbursed from payers for their time to use your technology. Likewise, facility customers have also incurred costs and expect, once again, those costs are, they typically purchase the product, they typically have to store it, provide staff and the room and the facilities to do and support and utilities. They too expect to be reimbursed for their costs for purchasing and using your medical technology. So let's see how reimbursement, which is essentially a transaction, a financial transaction from a payer, such as Medicare, Medicaid, or the commercial or private insurers, for purchasing and using your technology. So let's look at this, why reimbursement is important for U.S. commercial success. This is a was taken from Hospital Corporation of America. This is from their 2020 annual report. And Hospital Corporation of America is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It is the largest operator and owner of hospitals throughout the United States. And so what we have here is years 2019, and 2018. And in 2020, the HCA, Hospital Corporation of America, made roughly $51.5 billion in reimbursements. And the reimbursements come from Medicare, Medicaid, commercial payers. HCA, by the way, also operates a hospital system in England, and earned roughly $1.1 billion from those operations. So in 2020, HCA made $51.5 billion and in reimbursement, and that reimbursement once again is from these payers for purchasing and using a whole host of medical technologies and drugs, whatever that is, but this is the reimbursement that they have received back. In 2019, they made $51.3 billion, and in 2018, $46.6 billion from these variety from, once again, from this mix of payers. This mix of payers is often referred to as payer mix, and every healthcare provider, be it facility or professional, has a payer mix. And a payer mix really describes how much reimbursement they have garnered for a particular period in time. In this particular period, it's calendar years. And then also the ratio. If we look at HCA, Medicare is roughly about 34% of its revenue in 2020. In 2019, it was roughly 33%. So this is important to understand that reimbursement is a financial transaction from a payer to a provider, be it facility or clinical, for purchasing and using a medical technology. So as we wrap up this section here, why reimbursement is important for commercial success, I would like to just point out that in the US, private and public payers render reimbursement to your customers, the facility, the hospital, the ambulatory surgical center, as well as the professional physicians, for the costs they incurred for purchasing and using your medical technology. Payer reimbursement is your US clinical customers' operating revenue. In other words, how your customers make money is through purchasing and using your product with the expectation of being reimbursed back from either a private or a public payer. I've just wrapped up the first session. I'm now going to move into, I'm going to talk about some decisions that US payers make that will affect your reimbursement planning. And payers make, I would say, roughly about 5 or 6 really key decisions that will affect your planning efforts. In the time I have with you, I'm going to focus in on 2 of those decisions, and these are the most common decisions why medical technologies are not reimbursed. It's not coding, it's coverage policies and rules, as well as reimbursement methodologies. So let's look at the first payer decision called the coverage policy. A negative or the absence of a coverage policy is the #1 reason why the primary and the adjunctive technologies are not reimbursed. It is not coding, it is coverage. Each payer amends their current or creates their new coverage policy for the primary technology. And I want to just share with everyone, when I talk about primary and adjunctive, my instincts tell me most of you are most likely going to be adjunctive technologies. But let me explain to you the difference, because I'm going to be using this terminology throughout the rest of my presentation. The primary technology or the primary procedure, they're both synonymous. And what that means is that is the reason a patient has been admitted to a hospital or to see the physician or for home health or for health or for care at home. And when we say primary technology, for example, the aortic valve replacement, the mitral valve replacement, the knee replacement in the ambulatory surgical center, the hip replacement. So those are, it is the primary technology or procedure. Adjunctive technologies or procedures support the primary technology. They may make the primary technology faster, cheaper. They might add wireless capability, communication between the home and what we'll say a physician or a physical therapist. So adjunctive supports primary, once again, the reason for my office visit, the reason for my admission to the hospital, the reason for my admission to the hospital outpatient. So that's an important distinction. And as I wrap up this slide, I think it's also important to understand, why do payers create or amend their coverage policies for the primary technology? They do not make coverage policies for the adjunctive. They make it for the primary. They want to establish new policies for emerging primary technologies, or they want to modify current policies for existing primary technologies. And I think what's important to understand here is most of you, I get a sense, are adjunctive. And as a result, you need to keep a very close eye on payers either establishing new or modifying current coverage policies for the existing technologies. Because if the primary technology coverage policy changes, it changes for the adjunctive as well. So I'd just like to go over a couple of examples of coverage policies. I'm going to focus on Medicare, and I'm going to do that intentionally. One, because Medicare is actually the largest payer in the United States as well as the world, and a lot of their decisions do influence the private payers in terms of their decisions on their coverage policies. So this is a coverage policy that Medicare created. This is creation of a new policy. As I mentioned, payers make coverage policies for two reasons. One is to create a new one for an emerging technology, or as we'll see in the next example, modify an existing coverage policy for a current primary technology. So the primary technology here is carotid stenting. And this was Medicare's coverage decision for a carotid stenting procedure that reimburses the carotid stenting facility, once again, our facility provider, and the interventionalist or the physician, only under the following conditions. The Medicare beneficiary or patient is enrolled in an FDA-approved Category B IDE study or a large mandated FDA post-approval study, or the beneficiary is considered high risk for carotid endarterectomy and has symptomatic carotid arterial stenosis greater than 70%. And these procedures must be performed in a Medicare-approved carotid stenting facility. If a carotid stenting procedure, which is the primary procedure, and all its adjunctive technologies that support this procedure, for example, is done not in a Medicare-approved carotid stenting facility, that stenting facility, as well as the physician, will not be reimbursed from Medicare. So it's important to understand that coverage policies, once again, written for primary technologies, really include the inclusion and exclusion criteria under which both the facility and the professional healthcare provider will be reimbursed. Let's look at another Medicare decision here, modification to an existing coverage policy. And in this coverage policy, the primary technology is anorectal manometry. An anorectal manometry is a diagnostic test for fecal incontinence, and it's currently in the US only performed in the hospital. It's actually a very expensive test. It costs roughly a hospital over $100,000 to staff and maintain the equipment to do this test. And this is an interesting case where what Medicare did is, and this is a modification to an existing coverage policy for anorectal manometry. What Medicare did to this modification, and then the private payers followed as well, is Medicare came in and limited anorectal manometry to being billed twice in a patient's lifetime. Twice in a patient's lifetime. Now, this is interesting. This particular coverage policy essentially closed a company we were working for. That is, a company had retained us to do work for them, and they had a point of care test for anorectal manometry. And a point of care test means it could be done in a hospital outpatient, it could be done in the physician's office. Essentially, what they were trying to do is offer other options for this test as opposed to the expensive hospital-based test. But what had happened is once Medicare came out with this ruling that providers, the hospital and the physician, can only bill the test twice in a patient's lifetime, the company determined they could not proceed any further with their point of care test for anorectal manometry. It just was the patient base was just not there for them. And essentially the company closed and resurfaced, still in the point of care test, but under a whole nother application. So it's a good example, everyone, of how a coverage policy for the primary, once again, the primary and the adjunctive, if there's adjunctive technologies that are needed for this anorectal manometry test, this fecal test, a fecal incontinence test, they too will only be limited to being billed by a provider twice in a patient's lifetime. Another key payer decision that will affect your US reimbursement planning efforts is reimbursement methodology. And as I mentioned in here, unfavorable reimbursement methodologies is the second reason why the primary and adjunctive technologies are not reimbursed by US payers. It is not coding. Capitated reimbursement methodologies, capitated reimbursement methodologies, once again, it is a type of reimbursement methodology, affects reimbursement for both the primary and the adjunctive. And we're going to talk about how capitated reimbursement methodologies affect reimbursement for the primary and adjunctive procedures. We're going to look at two. We're going to look at one from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, a private payer related to a hip knee program, and Medicare Advantage. Two types of very different capitated payment reimbursement methodologies. So Blue Cross Blue Shield recently launched a capitated payment system for total knee and hip replacement with the 4 largest orthopedic physician practices in Tennessee. This particular payment methodology covers all procedures performed and all products bought and used by the hospital, by the facility, and the professional provider, healthcare providers. For those members who are part of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, and essentially Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee will pay the physician group one sum, and this sum will start 60 days from the time this payment covers, once again, all procedures and products used from the time the patient enters the hospital, has either a total hip or knee replacement, until 60 days after they are discharged. So all therapy sessions, all drugs, all bandages, canes, whatever is needed is paid one sum for everything that's done from admission to post 60 days discharge. Medicare Advantage. It is another type of Medicare program here in the US. We have traditional and we have Advantage. And essentially, with Medicare Advantage, what happens is for those commercial payers who offer Medicare Advantage plans, Medicare will pay those payers one sum or one amount of money, a single amount of money for that particular Medicare patient for the year. So all medical procedures that are done within that year are covered in that lump sum. That includes all primary and all adjunctive. And as a result, adjunctive or primaries have very little, if any, ability to affect that payment. And in fact, you could be considered a cost center because there is no incremental reimbursement available under Medicare Advantage because of the lump sum payment. So in wrapping up this session here regarding decisions that both public and private payers make that will affect your reimbursement planning, once again, a negative or absence of a coverage policy is the number one reason primary and adjunctive medical technologies are not reimbursed by payers. It is not coding. The second takeaway, capitated reimbursement methodologies is the second reason why primary and adjunctive medical technologies are not reimbursed by payers. It is not coding. And I think just so everyone understands too, the payers are increasingly using capitated reimbursement methodologies. That is paying the providers, be it the physician or the hospital, ambulatory surgical center, who have one sum for all work done within a specified period of time. And that is getting increasingly popular. That is becoming the most popular methodology to reimburse, for payers to reimburse healthcare providers here in the United States. I'm going to now wrap up here with a very, what is one of the most important reimbursement planning decisions that companies have to make. So there are some unique characteristics in the U.S. payer market, and Kate touched on some of them. She talked about the amount of private as well as public payers here in the United States. Under the private, we have large, and some of these are publicly traded companies. United Healthcare is all of these companies are publicly traded except Kaiser, Google, Apple, Boeing. Many large companies have their own health insurance plans. So, and they are considered over here on the left-hand side, private insurance, as Kate described. And over on the right-hand side, I have some very popular public insurance policies or health insurance plans. Medicaid, as Kate said, the insurance for those over 65. Medicare, those for the working poor and very poor. The Department of Veterans Affairs, once again, these are civilian. These are military. The Department of Veterans Affairs, it is health insurance for those who have served in war. And TRICARE is for those who are currently serving in war. So some very unique characteristics of the U.S. payer market is the market is fragmented. As Kate talked about, as well as myself, we have a proliferate. Over on the private healthcare side, there is at least 100 private health insurance companies. I would say probably 15 that really matter. And then over on the public, these are some of the big public, once again, civilian and military. Oops, let's see. Sorry about this. Okay. And as a result of the many different types of payers, the market is very fragmented. Many different types of public payers and many different types of private payers. In addition, the U.S. payer operations are highly decentralized. That is, each payer makes their own coverage policy, rules, and regulation decisions for the primary technology. Once again, as I mentioned, and I'm going to repeat, the adjunctive technology, if there's changes to your primary, the adjunctive technologies will be impacted just as well. But once again, it's important to understand each payer, each of these in different types of payer, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program, Veterans Administration, if we have an aortic valve replacement, each of them will make their own unique coverage decision for that aortic valve primary procedure. So operations are decentralized. Each payer also makes their own reimbursement methodology decision. How are they going to pay? Is it going to be lump sum? If so, what is the time frame? Who's impacted? Or is it going to be line item? Or is it going to be another methodology? But each of these payers make these decisions, and it's for the primary technology. So your charge as within, if we talk about the most important decision that companies have to make is, who is your beachhead payer? Who is your beachhead payer? That is, very few companies, if any, can tackle both private and public payers, or approach public and private payers for reimbursement at the same time. Medtronic's never done it. Boston Scientific's never done it. Smith & Nephew's never done it. So your task, your decision is to find out within the U.S. payers who has the most favorable coverage policy for your primary technology, who has the most favorable reimbursement methodology for the primary technology. And if you can answer those two questions, you probably have now started to focus on who is your beachhead payer. So with that, excuse me, talking about the most important decision that companies have to make, that is identifying that beachhead payer, I'd like to open up the session now for about 10 minutes of questions. And as I mentioned, if there are questions after today's workshop, please mail them to Kate and she will forward them on to me and I'd be glad to respond. I would like to start though, we did receive a couple of questions from two companies, and I'd like to maybe just start and respond to them. Is ITIC here? Could you raise your hand? Okay, I seem to have lost, let's see. Kate, do you see if did anyone raise their hand? Is ITIC here? Anyone from ITIC?
I do believe that they're registered, but I can't see them on the screen. But I think if we could go ahead with that question, that would be great.
Okay, great. So ITIC asked how to gauge the market size if there are related CPT codes. And I think what's being asked here is, if there, I think how I would answer this for ITIC, and following today's presentation, I would look for, I would first focus on coverage policies and reimbursement methodology before I would even consider using coding to help gauge my market size. For example, if for the primary technology, there is a very, what we'll say, broad inclusion and exclusion criteria in that in your beachhead payers coverage policy, that to me would be a positive event and support possibly a higher market size than if I had a negative coverage policy for that primary technology. Likewise, I would understand the reimbursement methodology. If your primary technology is to be used by Medicare Advantage patients. As I mentioned, Medicare Advantage is a single sum paid to private payers, U.S. private payers, for managing Medicare beneficiaries outside of traditional Medicare. And so if you believe your technology is going to be ideal for Medicare Advantage, but once again, there is no additional reimbursement for your technology under Medicare Advantage, then you might have to reconsider market size. It's not necessarily bad or good. You could approach Medicare Advantage or make the case that you would help the private payer who is administering that Medicare Advantage program to save money. Because if they save money while delivering care, they increase the profitability as a result of lower costs, but yet the amount that they have received is fixed. Regarding codes, if you do find favorable coding, that is, they are billing codes and not tracking codes. 80%, by the way, of all codes are tracking. They don't result in any reimbursement. But if you found some relevant billing codes and a positive, I'll say a positive coverage policy for the primary technology, and the reimbursement methodology wasn't capitated, I think all three of those would be justification to have a generous, I'll say, I would give you more leeway, more verification or validation of the market size that you have selected for that medical technology. Pulseman, let's see, I'm sorry, but if you are here, can you please rephrase your question? Pulseman, are you Plusman?
So that's Yusuke
Yeah.
is one of the co-founders of Plusman LLC, and they're developing an AI technology for improving and advancing radiology imaging for
Right.
nodules. So I believe, can you repeat his question, and maybe he
Can
has
people see the question? Can you all see the question?
No,
Oh, you can't.
apologies.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. I've now pulled up the two questions. Let me
So
just
this-
stop sharing the screen and then let me reshare the screen. Okay. Okay. Let me know if you see the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the question is, what does CMS say is missing for CAD to be reimbursed? I think regarding computer-aided detection, many times we find CMS does not reimburse for computer-aided detection for the facility, but they may reimburse the professional healthcare provider, the physician, for example, the radiologist, who may be using it to assist him or her. But computer-aided detection is a very tricky area for reimbursement. And based on our experience, we've worked on a lot of computer-aided detection systems over the years. We have found that computer-aided detection systems typically don't have a strong reimbursement pathway. However, they could have a strong value-based or cost-effectiveness pathway that is showing how the CAD could save money. That is allowing the radiologist higher throughput time, higher throughput in reading their images. Is one that comes to mind, is higher throughput. So, but that's what we have found. It's not the strongest of reimbursement pathways, but it still needs to be investigated. And what I would recommend to Plusman is that they need to probably focus on specifically the application. Is it for radiology? And if so, what type of radiology? X-ray, fast MRI, CT, PET scans, and then start to dig into the coverage policies for each of those primary technologies and see what is and isn't reimbursed. And if nothing's found, then one would move into a cost effectiveness, possibly argument. Other questions?
Yes, Susan, I see a couple of questions on the Q&A box, if you can open it up.
Okay, great. Can people see, and can you see the questions?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Okay, so we have a question here. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for attending. What is the ratio between fee for service versus capitated or any other payment methodology? I will share with you the leader in the payers who use capitated the most. You have to look at this on a payer by payer basis. For example, Medicare and Medicaid over on the civilian side. We only, by the way, I'll share with everyone, we only work, Rowinsky Group only works in the civilian insurance markets. We don't do the veterans, or we don't work in defense insurance such as the Veterans Administration or TRICARE. But within the civilian healthcare markets, Medicare and Medicaid are the leaders. They use capitated payment methodologies, and particularly capitated on the more on the facility side versus on the professional side for professional providers. Once again, the facility being the hospital, ambulatory surgical center, hospital outpatient, they purchase products, they provide rooms, they provide staff, all of the infrastructure for the professional provider, the physician, for example, to do his or her work. So you really need to break it down by payer, and also understand that capitated is more commonly used for the facility payer than the professional payer. And Medicare and Medicaid are the leaders in this. The fee for service, you're going to typically find more of that, more than the capitated payment methodology over on the private insurance. However, we do a lot of work in private insurance, and we're seeing the private insurers, United Healthcare, Humana, Kaiser, Mayo Clinic, using more and more capitated payments, mostly more commonly, though not exclusively, focused on the facility healthcare provider versus the professional healthcare provider. And then we have here, what are some of the more common assumptions technology developers, what are some of the more common assumptions technology developers make? I'm sorry, I just don't understand. I'll tell you a wrong assumption that technology developers make. And we see it all the time. We continue to see it. We've seen it for the over 20 years that the firm has been in, almost 20 years that we've been in business. Technology developers assume if they find a code that reimbursement is in place, and that nothing could be further from the truth. And partly because many codes, 80% of all the codes are tracking codes, whether it's in the CPT, ICD-10, or HCPCS system. Those are the big three billing systems that are most commonly used. And the fact that they have often picked a tracking codes. Once again, the most popular of these codes, roughly 80% of all codes are tracking codes, are there. They do not yield reimbursement. They are there simply to track usage. So that is an assumption that's made by very many developers. And I hope when everybody, and I have 1 minute here left, I hope my presentation has at least opened you or introduced you to the concept that it's coverage and reimbursement methodologies that will have far more impact on your U.S. reimbursement planning efforts than coding. On that note, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was really, really insightful. And I think it just kind of uncovers how complicated the system is. we really appreciate how you've broken down some of these very common and, most important aspects when looking at coding and thinking about reimbursement. I know that we will have probably more questions that will come up, so I will work with you to work with the teams on what they need, and we'll follow up. So if anybody does have any questions that they want to follow up with me, please feel free to contact me directly. So thanks again, Susan.
Okay.
Really appreciate it. Really thorough look into what's important to think about, and we really appreciate it. So we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
So I will share my screen, and I want to introduce our next speaker, who is, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Why am I having problems? Hang on a second. I think because I was kind of assuming it was being shared. Okay, can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so our next panelist is Regina Liang, who is working also with our Focus Academy faculty. Regina has a wide variety of experience in the biopharma and device space. She has more recently formed a new venture capital company with colleagues called Tonic Bioventures. Prior to that, she was focused on very strategic consulting for the the pharmaceutical industry and medical device sector, and has worked with a lot of international companies, and I know traveled quite extensively working with them on specific projects. She has a lot of experience in the marketing side of things, also reimbursement and the regulatory side. Her roles have been very much focused on commercialization. She's worked with companies like Bristol Myers Squibb, McKesson, PDL Pharma, and more recently Gilead. She's also had experience in the clinical space working with IQVIA, and she is currently serves as an advisor and board member to a number of accelerators, particularly here in the Bay Area. She works with Skydeck, as many of you are familiar with. She also works with UC Berkeley and the California Life Sciences Institute. And she is a reviewer for exits, I believe, with the Keiretsu Forum, which is an angel investment group here. Well, has one location here in San Francisco, but many locations across the country. So I'm going to hand it over to Regina. She also would like to share, and I'm going to turn off my video. So thanks, Regina. Really appreciate and great to see you. I will mute.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Regina, as Kate has introduced me. Thank you for the opportunity today to present to you and maybe talk a little bit my reimbursement experience. So by way of background, I've been really working in healthcare 25, almost 30 years. My undergrad was in UK. I came to United States a long time ago. So really the reimbursement landscape has changed quite a bit if you look at what's happening. And unfortunately, the trend, at least in medical devices, and I can talk both because my experience kind of have been in therapeutics as well as medical devices. And I'll start with kind of the not so good news. In medical devices, the reimbursement landscape is actually getting more and more challenged, diagnostics and devices together. So as far as the trend, the reimbursement is getting tighter and tighter. I think there's a lot more innovations coming into the market. So there's been a huge demand and a push for innovation, but unfortunately on the reimbursement side, it hasn't kept up pace with the innovation. And I have some updates to share with you. There has been some recent regulatory changes on the reimbursement, and I'll provide kind of more of an update. On the therapeutic side, I know there's not a lot of therapeutic companies, but I'll just talk about it as well. the reimbursement on certain categories, such as rare diseases, orphan diseases, as well as oncology, continues to be very advantageous. Those are high unmet need areas. In some cases, there is little or basically just one to two option for certain treatment. So it has been, I would say, pretty lucrative on the reimbursement aspects. And so not such a challenge on the therapeutic side. Again, it depends on how crowded the particular indication therapeutic area is. But by and large, on the therapeutic side, it continues to grow and expand. So I will start off by way of introduction. One of my prior experiences with reimbursement. And feel free if there's questions. I really want this session to be interactive versus me just talking. So I started my career actually right after I got my master's degree in business in an early stage startup company. This was around 2000. It was a electronic handheld prescription writer. So in the US, physicians have typically very bad handwriting. In a lot of cases, it results in either injuries or side effects because the wrong drug is being prescribed when the drug is being filled at a pharmacy. Because of the bad handwriting, sometimes the wrong drug is being dispensed. So we launched a company, it was funded by a top venture company called Kleiner Perkins. And the idea was to have on a medical device platform, the physician will actually write. Everything is electronically, kind of generated. So at the end of the day, when the patient leaves the office, there will be a script. And that script will be electronically sent over to a pharmacy, whether it's Walgreens or Rite Aid. So I think the moral of the story is, while the business, in terms of the idea of solving the problem was meaningful, we really didn't have a reimbursement or coverage strategy until almost at the very end. And it's a very easy equation in med devices, right? There's a cost and then there's a reimbursement. And the delta between the two numbers is what, healthcare providers, hospitals, right, make. So both sides of the equation has to be there. So we were selling to physicians, but we really didn't have a reimbursement model. So that was a very painful way to launch the product. And eventually we figured it out, and we actually helped to get it acquired to CVS Health, which is both an insurance and a pharmacy, the number 2 payers in the United States. So anyway, I want to share that story, bit of a war story. And so I'll go into kind of a little bit on some of the areas of update. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I want to just provide a couple of regulatory updates for this group. And I'm going to share my screen. So if everybody can see, I'll start off with, this is a recent, can everybody see it? I take it that.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So this is a recent development. So what's happening is when you are going through, say if you're a medical device, you're going through a regulatory review, what we call FDA pre-submission meeting. So in the past, it's always been clinical, right? Is what does your product solve? What does it do? And what are some of the clinical, kind of improvements? And then you get the FDA clearance, approval and a clearance. So what's happening now in the United States is, I think the regulatory bodies realize to get a reimbursement code, and I think Susan covered some of this in the prior session, it takes literally between 9 to 12 months from the time you get that product to be FDA cleared or approved. You have a lag time where there's no clear reimbursement codes because that process takes, like I said, up to about 12 months. So when you don't have Reimbursed, like my war story earlier, it is extremely challenging to sell the product with a lot of uncertainty because at the end of the day, people want to be paid, and that's through the reimbursement codes. So I think the FDA recognized the challenge and it stifles innovation. So what they've done now is, this is the regulatory body. So for med devices, it's called a CDA, which stands for Center for Device and Radiological Health. That is the body that evaluates the safety and effectiveness of medical devices in the US. So CDA recently established a fairly new, they call it the Payer Communication Task Force. And this is important, and let me explain what this task force is. During the pre-submission meeting, which is where your product, you're applying for FDA approval, and you are now engaging with the FDA, body. They are now allowing you to have communications, open communications, to get input from payers that can actually give you an idea, will they be covering your product? And if they're going to cover it, under what conditions would it be covered? And then roughly what sort of coverage, pricing, reimbursement dollars, they most likely will be covering. And also, are there exceptions to the rules, right? Because it's a highly competitive area. So I'm going to show you as I scroll through this document. So during the pre-submission meeting, you could ask for, as part of the review, a payer feedback. It's called the Early Payer Feedback Program. And you can literally, during this submission meeting, prior to that, you can ask for this program. And now I just want to emphasize, this is a completely voluntary opportunity. You are not obliged, nor do you have to do it. But I strongly encourage it because getting payer input early on, prior to your product being approved by FDA, is absolutely critical. So if you have the opportunity, seek it. I strongly encourage it. And here's a list of the participating US insurance companies. And I heard Susan mention just earlier, United Healthcare Group. United Healthcare Group is one of the top 3 payer insurance provider in the United States. The fact that they're actually here and it's part of that is fantastic, because it allows you to really get meaningful kind of head points, right? Kind of coverage, what sort of coverage, are there exceptions, under what conditions would they cover it? There are other groups. So Premier is what we call a group purchasing organization. They are probably one of the largest. So GPOs is what they're called. They are owned by Premier. It's completely 100% owned by hospitals. And I believe there's roughly about 36 hospitals. Over 300 hospitals. So Premier is, if your product is mostly utilized in a hospital setting, that will be the group that you will want to talk to. They're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you go further up in this document, Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser Permanente is a hospital, large, what we call closed system. The physicians or providers are owned actually by the insurance, so hence closed, right? So that's a fairly unique hospital system that you can, again, once you're in, but getting in there is very hard. So having an open dialogue with now, as part of the pre-sub meeting, it's going to be very valuable for you. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor on this point, but that's kind of a recent advancement that I really think it's important to share. Okay, I don't know if there's any questions. So moving along here to the next area. sorry, there's a lot of screens open here. So moving along to the next area. I don't know how to dismiss. I see a lot of dialogue here. How there's a question in how do a company, payer, and the FDA interact with each other? So if you're a med device company, you would seek regulatory approval through the FDA. And during the FDA review process, you can ask for this payer task force. So it is part of the FDA kind of review, but this task force is a specially created task force within kind of the FDA review process. So it's embedded in that process and you'll basically apply. So that's how you would reach it. And if you are interested, I can send a follow-up kind of a communication, just a little bit more details around how you would apply as part of the FDA review process. Hope that helps.
Regina, this is really fascinating, and I think this is really important information for people to know about.
Yep.
I'm actually curious on the public side, if your payers are going to be mostly coming from Medicare or Medicaid, CMS,
Mm-hmm.
Are there also, did I miss it, or are they participating in this program?
So these are commercial payers. There's no CMS. Sorry,
Right.
there's CMS right here.
Oh,
So you could ask as well.
right.
Yeah. So this is a great comment here. So CMS for certain diseases in the United States, unlike Japan, certain areas such as, like if you have kidney problems and you ended up doing kidney dialysis as an example, if you have a medical device that treats kidney problems or kidney dialysis, the payer type, and I don't know how much Susan has explained this, there are really two types of payers in the United States. There is the government, which is called CMS, which stands for Center for Medicare and Medicaid. There is the private payers, which are all these guys: Aetna, Blue Cross, Clover, Duke, Humana, Kaiser, Premier, United. These are private. So the pecking order is important. And let me explain why. If you're in kidney dialysis, medical device area, the government, if you break down the coverage, 60% of the business in kidney dialysis, 65, are all going to be reimbursed by the government. And the other remaining is private pay. So if you're a kidney dialysis medical device manufacturer, it is absolutely beneficial that you make sure, right, your initial outreach is going to be with the CMS division. Because you can see 65% of your business is going to get reimbursed by the government versus another 35% by private payer. So you have to make decisions, right, based on what patient population your device serves and who ultimately pays. Is it predominantly more private? If that's the case, then you will go to more of these other groups, right? So I hope that kind of is helpful.
You know, it's great to see they're participating. I hadn't noticed them, but that's great, because yes, she did talk about the beachhead and about choosing who your first protocol is going to be, whether it's going to be public or private. But thank you, I appreciate it.
Then I'm going to move along to the next area, and this is fairly new. So now this is Medicare. So this is the government side, the CMS side. So recently, as of last year, they have a new proposed rule. So it's not officially approved, but it's a proposal that's out in the public. So knowing that there are issues with reimbursement and there's a delay, right? Once your product, as I mentioned earlier, FDA approved, there's 9 to 12 months where you are just hanging, right? Because you're still getting kind of clearance on coverage and reimbursement dollar. So this is a fairly new CMS move. again, it's a proposal. It's not officially approved. So what they're proposing under this, it's called the MCIT pathway. So it stands for Medical Coverage Innovative Technology Designation. That's what that is. So for medical devices that are what we call FDA breakthrough technologies, and let me explain what breakthrough definition. It's right here. And this is when you see a breakthrough designation, this is an FDA terminology, and it has to be issued by only FDA in the US. It stands for products that meet certain criteria that are really critical, serving patient populations because there's no or very little alternative, right? So in the drug side, in a certain disease type area, there could be just one drug for that treatment. So it's what we call a high unmet need area. So if you come on as a second drug manufacturer, right, and your drug is actually better than what's already available as the only other alternative in the market, that is what we call a breakthrough designation. And that is an important label because with this designation, and here's what the proposal is. And again, this is fairly new. They just closed the comment of last year, November. They're still trying to figure out what to do here. But what this proposal basically provides is from the time you get the FDA product approval, you get 4 years on a temporary coverage because of the high unmet need, associated with whether it's a drug or a device. So under Medicare, they're allowing you to get basically here, right, 4 years of coverage from the date your product or your device is cleared by the FDA, which makes, right, you as a product super interesting and obviously much more palatable, right? Because now with this temporary code for 4 years, physicians, hospitals, right, payers are getting paid. So this is if it's approved, it's a monumental kind of trajectory to making sure that innovation, right, continues, and companies like yourself continues to push the innovation and adopting those innovation into the market. So again, this has not been completely clear, but it's something to watch for med devices. And after the end of 4 years, you will then be evaluated, like a proper, we call it NCD. I don't know if Susan covered it. It's the National Coverage Determination, which is an official reimbursement code is then assigned. But it does makes your product super more interesting, right? Because of this breakthrough designation. So again, this is something to watch. I think this is going to continue to propel the adoption of innovation in the marketplace. I don't know if there's questions, and I have one more, and I'm a little bit off. I don't know many more minutes. So the last topic I want to bring up, and this isn't a very important one, and this is a fairly recent trend in the United States, and really, I think it started off really what we call the accountable care. So back in kind of the late 2000, 2010, early 2000, kind of late 2013, 2014, because the cost to treat is so tremendously expensive. So what the government has started launching into the main line is a new regulatory ruling, where instead of physicians or hospitals being paid per transaction, the idea of value-based, which means you have to treat the patient holistically. It cannot be, I gave you the drug, right? And the drug costs, let's say, $100, and that's it. That's how you get reimbursed. It doesn't take into, and this is the bullet number 2, this is a really important concept, making sure that the quality of care improves. you told us that your device does X, right? Patient starts at point X. And you said through the use of your device, the patient can improve their care. And now they're in point Y. And that's the claims, right? When you go through the FDA review or approval process, you have to have claims. And you claim the benefit of your product went from point X to point Y. In the past, we always look at the cost of the device, and then we add a premium, and that is the reimbursement rate. Well, in the United States now, there is this whole value-based care, which is, no, that's not good enough. You told us patient has benefit from moving from X to Y. We want to see that at the end of the day, after we pay for your product, right? We want to see indeed, based on your claim, our patient population has improved from point X to Y. So there is now this ongoing kind of migration or movement into a value-based kind of reimbursement model. And it started much sooner in drugs. So I can't divulge too much information, but my career at Gilead, we were already adopting value-based contract. So basically what that means is, right, I'll make up an example. We had a drug, it was hepatitis C. And you take this drug basically for between 8 to 10 weeks, you are completely cured. So, and the cure is based on a bunch of hemostasis and a bunch of metrics that we could measure from your body. So entering into a value-based care basically said, by the end of 10 weeks, if you still see that the patient isn't cured, we will pay, right? Pay back some of the money. So that's the whole idea of value-based care. So now that has now moved from kind of a therapeutic into more device. So here I just want to show you some of the payment methods. As a manufacturer of a medical device or diagnostic device, these are some of the things that at least you should be aware of that's happening. And these are already existing. And I'm going to show you two kind of models, and we call that risk sharing. Basically, it's improving clinical outcomes of patients. It's risk sharing is another glamorous word to kind of say the same thing. But in the top model here, and there are 3 manufacturers. I'm not going to go through every single one, but I just want to share how the concept works. So Medtronic is probably one of the biggest medical device manufacturer in the United States. I mean, they have probably thousands of products. But in this particular case, Tyrx, T-Y-R-X, it's an implantable cardiac device for patients that have cardiac problems. So they have this, what we call antibacterial sleeve. So literally, if you have an implantable cardiac device, when you implant into the patient, there's a high likelihood of infection because you're opening up. So what they've done is they've created this antibacterial sleeve. It's literally like a pouch, and the cardiac device, implantable device, sits inside this, and it's a bioreabsorbable pouch. Basically, over time, the pouch dissipates. But the pouch is made up of a lot of antibiotics, hence antibacterial. So as an example of this, they have, Medtronic has about 1,000 contracts that they did contract with hospitals from a reimbursement, saying that if the patient, right, develops infection after receiving this antibacterial sleeve, they would basically reimburse the hospital, right? If let's say the product, I'm making this up, is $100 per pouch, the sleeve. And if let's say a certain patient population develop infection post-implantation, so instead of charging the hospital, $100, right, per sleeve, now they said no, because let's say 10% of your population has developed infection, we'll give back money, right? 1% of that $100. So now you're seeing these sort of contracts are getting more and more prevalent, in the United States. And similarly, Johnson & Johnson here, another very large company, they have a catheter ablation procedure where, again, if the procedure in the first year didn't work, and then kind of a second procedure in the following year, they will guarantee a discount back to you, right? Because it didn't do what it was supposed to do. So those are some of the contracting flavors, right? That from a coverage standpoint, that I want you to make sure that you're aware of. The second category here is what we call gain sharing, right? So here I'm going to use the simple BARD as part of Becton Dickinson now, which is again a very large manufacturer, device manufacturer, and they have an antibacterial catheter. So literally, it costs fairly minimal for the catheter itself without the bacterial layer, $5.85. But here's the thing, right? The beauty of this is if the antibacterial catheter, the coating which BARD, right, coats this catheter that prevents infection. So your typical catheter, probably is a 10%, right, infection rate. But with this new technology, antibacterial catheter, it may go down to 5%. And that 5% could be a lot of money because, right, when a patient has infection, you're going back to the hospital, and you may be staying, depends on the how quickly the bacteria spread. You could be in there for 3 to 5 days, and now you're accumulating thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So the idea is if BARD's technology, the device manufacturer, can actually reduce the infection rates, right? Now the hospital has a pool of money they save. And as part of this contract, they basically said, you need to share some of the savings with us because we've helped you reduce the infection rate. So this is kind of some of the innovative contracting methodologies that's out in the market by some of the larger companies. And it's a good way to kind of start thinking about those as you plan your reimbursement strategy. So I hope this is helpful, and this is all I have, at least for today. I'm happy to take any more questions or answer any more questions. I see one, which is a typical decision time for private versus public. So CMS takes quite a bit of time. I would say, yeah, I mean, so with private, I would say the time duration is about the same, but with private, there's a lot more uncertainty because it really depends on the policy of the insurance provider. So it could be more arbitrary, and it may take longer because of some of those. Versus CMS has always been fairly open and transparent about how they would cover and under what conditions they would cover. And there's more standards to it versus in private, there's more variation. So in private actually takes a little bit longer because of some of the nuance. So that's helpful. So Kate, that's all I have for today. I don't know if there's additional questions. Happy to take those.
No, I think that's it. But you kind of planted a seed in my brain. I was thinking about recently, we were talking about computer-aided detection and how some of the new AI technologies, we have a number of them that we're working with, that they can improve maybe post-surgery prognosis for patients or better ways of identifying early detection. Yep. And I'm just wondering, these companies are startups, so they're probably not able to have any kind of gain sharing model, but yep. Can you see that AI will start to kind of maybe play a role in this, maybe with the larger companies like GE or Philips? Because it's fascinating that they're not changing their charging, right? They're just sharing the profits. They're not actually reducing the cost of servicing the patient.
Yeah, so let me share with you a recent example of a company that I work with, and we talked to a lot of payers as part of the project. So they have a prototype of a sepsis detection, and and we interviewed a set number of providers, physicians, and a set number of payers. And what has really been interesting, Kate, is in the process of discovering what will get paid and who would get paid and how much would it get paid. Basically, the physician says, if a septic, if there's a diagnostic tool that can help me diagnose sepsis much earlier, therefore preventing, right, the patient, with multiple readmissions.
Right.
Because the worst thing about sepsis is if it's not clearly identified, you send the patient home. Then within 48 hours, they come back because it apparently the onset sometimes is delayed, but once it's onset, it accelerates very fast. So now after 48 hours, the patient's coming in. And in the United States hospital, we have, because of the Accountable Care Organization, and that's a whole different lecture. What ACO is they look at the number of readmission rates at the patient level. If you can reduce the readmission rates, right, by an X%, the government, CMS, will actually give you a pot of money, right? Because this is the whole outcomes, the value care, the value-based care model that I just explained. You're not just treating the patient, but you're actually preventing them coming back for more drastic, right, condition.
Yeah.
So they reimburse actually the hospital this lump sum of money, and we call it, it's called a star rating. So the higher the star rating, so 5 is the best and 1 is the worst. If you have a hospital that has a 5-star rating, I asked one of the physicians as part of the deliverable, is this part of money, which the incentive is, just because you're taking better care of patients, is this meaningful? Does it actually change behavior? And I think the question comes back, absolutely. The pot of money was so big, and all the physicians shared in it, as well as the hospital, management team. And it made us even more aware, right? We need to adopt better diagnosis, tools that can help us, right? So there's some of that. So if the AI tool can diagnose, right, patients more meaningfully and more accurately with super, predictive capability, therefore preventing the patient to come back, absolutely, you'll enjoy in the pool of money.
Well, it's pretty exciting then to think that there are breakthrough technologies that are getting faster approval, that are getting reimbursed, that there are better ways of contracting with hospitals and payers. So this is actually pretty exciting to hear, and the value-based delivery of medical care is really changing the way, and improving quality. So that's actually, really key takeaway from today. So thank you for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks for your insights. And we'll definitely follow up with you if there are any future questions, if that's okay.
Great. Yeah, we'd love to. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you everyone for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Great. So if I could share my screen properly this time, everybody's probably, let me see if we can, what is going on here? Can you guys see my screen okay?
Not yet. We saw you for a moment and it was gone.
I don't know why I'm having issues, but okay. Now can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I want to introduce Andrew Broderick, who some of you may already know from working directly with him on the GAH program. Andrew is our project director, research director here at Focus Academy. His background is he's worked in such a wide range of different organizations, everything from Stanford Research Institute. He actually has specialized in looking at new innovative technologies, particularly for the Japanese market when he was there. He is currently a research director at the Public Health Institute in Oakland, and he's very much specialized on the digital health practices and policies. He also works with San Francisco Tech Council, and his role there is to really look at what technologies are going to be needed for advancing accessibility for the aging community and those who are physically challenged. And he's actually been finding some really interesting new technologies that he's evaluating for that program. He works or has worked in consulting, as I said, for healthcare futures research. He's also been a project manager and program leader in multiple different digital health research programs and conducted technology assessments and market opportunities for different organizations, both in the public and private sector. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, and we may have him present a little bit about his perspective on digital health technology, and then we'll open it up for questions and some discussion. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to you, Andrew.
Wonderful, Kate. Thank you. And thank you so much, Regina and Susan. I really enjoyed both of your presentations. And it is such a complex area, like trying to follow public policy and then the implementation of public policy is very, very challenging. So I'm going to address one issue here, which is really just about digital health. And I hope I'll give a good rationale for why I want to include that. There's a little bit about me that the slide kind of presents that Kate has already introduced. Can you see my slides now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you can. Wonderful. And let me see. Sorry, just moving on. I always love to start just very quickly with the Commonwealth Fund, which is a New York-based foundation, always do this ranking comparison of health system economies of the OECD countries. And the US always ranks last, both in well, it ranks first in spending, ranks last in outcomes and quality of care for the best part. So, when you look across all these countries, which are similarly developed economies, they're spending about 9% on average of their GDP on healthcare. The US is at a higher rate of 18%, and it keeps increasing year on year. And then when you look at, the overall kind of what do you get for that healthcare dollar, it doesn't look very favorably on the US healthcare system. And one of the insights that comes out of this kind of analysis is, unlike other OECD countries, the US spends less money per healthcare dollar on social services. And that's changing now dramatically in the US from a public policy perspective. You may have heard of the term social determinants of health, which is really what are the factors that are contributing to being barriers in people's being healthy, and what are some of the ways that we can think about addressing those barriers and allowing them, to achieve better health outcomes. So social determinants of health can span everything from housing to their economic kind of socioeconomic status, education, and more recently, what's been added to this list of social determinants of health is the digital divide. So in the US, again, there are about 20 million older adults who do not have internet connectivity at home. And that is an amazing number of older adults when you think about there's about 60 million total, and about a third of them are not connected in any way to the internet. And that was a survey that was released earlier this year by a group called Older Adults Technology Services, which is a kind of partner kind of organization with AARP and the Humana organization, which is a health payer kind of provider kind of organization in the Southeast. So keeping those 2 points in mind, I just want to put up this slide because I think it really does highlight some of the kind of issues when you look at age tech, which is really what I want to focus on here. And you look at the market for age tech and you try to understand, well, what is that addressable market? So we know people are getting older day by day. In the US, every year, The replacement rate of older adults, that being individuals over 65, is 1.5 million. Sounds really good from a market perspective in terms of growth and the number of individuals that are continuing to seek care and need care. Interesting data point, 76%. AARP in their annual surveys finds that 76% of older adults, and they count people over the age of 50, want to age in place. They want to stay at home, they want to stay in the community, they want to be independent, and they want to realize a high quality of life. That's a great challenge. It's a good opportunity. How do you do that? We're looking at the 24 million figure, as Susan earlier talked about Medicare. And what we're seeing in Medicare now is we're moving from the traditional or original Medicare model, which was very fee-for-service based, to a capitated at-risk model for providers. And those are being administered by the major health plans, Humana, Cigna, Aetna, Kaiser. And what they're doing that's different to the traditional or original Medicare is they are offering greater benefits than the original Medicare. So if you look at original Medicare, what it did cover was hospital insurance and medical coverage and drug coverage. It did not cover vision, dental, hearing, long-term care, or even custodial care. And if people needed that coverage, they had to go and get supplemental Medigap insurance to have those services provided, or they needed to be covered by Medicaid as well as Medicare. And that population we call the dual eligibles. And those dual eligibles are usually the sickest and the costliest to care for. And they are a representative population within this older adult population that have dual coverage under both Medicare and Medicaid. Going back to Medicare Advantage, it covers everything original Medicare covered in terms of the hospital, the medical, and the drug coverage. But what it is adding to that is greater extended benefits. And so if we think about the social determinants of health that I mentioned earlier, what they have introduced are extended benefits for long-term services and supports. So these are services that are going to be delivered in a home or community-based setting. They can have a health-related kind of aspect to the service, or they may just be for social benefit, ensuring that person is achieving that independence, achieving that quality of life. And under that, there's greater flexibility for what you can do with technology, and especially digital technology, and the services that you can provide to keep somebody healthy and keep them in the home and community setting. Because if that's the desire that older adults have, we all know as we get older, we get frailer, we get sicker, and it becomes more challenging to maintain that independence and to stay at home or in the community. But if you look at it from a payer perspective, the one thing we want to do is we want to keep people at a long-term care institutional settings, because that's when we see the dollars really go high in terms of the cost of care that has to be delivered to the individual. So we're trying to play this game at the moment in terms of keeping people aging in place and preventing long-term institutional care. We talked a little about the veteran system earlier. I've done work looking at their role using remote healthcare technologies, and that's their prime motivation. We want to use technology so we can keep people at home, so we keep them out of institutional long-term care settings. And they're dealing with many sick veterans, you know, and using remote patient monitoring, using telehealth video consults, and other kind of technologies that would enable them to do that. As a health system, the Veterans Administration is really a great model in terms of looking at how they have done that well and done it effectively. You look across at the rest of the US health system, they're on a learning curve trying to understand how to do that. We all know technology is about 10% of the actual total solution. The 90% of technology implementation is social. And what the VA have shown is they can systemize this and they can routinize this into their everyday care services delivery. And everybody else is trying to catch up with the culture change and the transformation that has to go with that. So I just want to touch on one technology because it does have reimbursement associated with it at the moment. I will go back just at the end a little bit towards the Medicare Advantage, but I do want to just focus on remote patient monitoring. So in 2019, 2020, Medicare introduced some codes for remote patient monitoring. And there are 5 primary codes. And basically what the codes allow is to collect physiologic data from patients remotely, to capture that, and then to provide it back to the primary care providers. And so these codes are broken down into helping with the implementation and setup of the device, as well as patient education on how to use the device. That's the very left-hand side. And then there's the actual aspect of monitoring the individual. So what Medicare requires is between 15 and 30 days of a month have to involve monitoring. So if, 16 days and 30 days. So if you only do 15 days, I don't believe you're going to get reimbursed, for that. So the kind of key is you have to be monitoring continuously to be able to collect the data that then in these 3 other codes, 5758, the 2 other codes that you see there is those are for the provider to take the data from the remote monitoring, look at it, and then to be able to kind of interact with the patient and talk about the data. So they have to spend 20 minutes talking, interacting with the patient to be able to bill for that on a monthly basis. So first you have the code for setup and education, then you have the code for the monitoring, has to be at least 16 days. And then the provider can also bill in 20-minute increments every month. And there can be subsequent kind of 20-minute interactions talking with that patient about what the RPM data is showing them. So that's a good example of something that's under Medicare under fee-for-service today. There's also another kind of reimbursement coverage under what they call chronic care management, which is a bit broader than just only RPM, but it includes RPM because it has to go around the care management plan that has been designed by the provider for the particular individual. And it incorporates some more activities than just what I've highlighted through the RPM. What CMS are going to introduce in 2022 is a new code called Remote Therapeutic Monitoring. And that is for non-physiologic data. So this is for technologies that support adherence, for example, of medication. So a pill box, for example, could be captured under the codes that are going to be released by Medicare and CMS in terms of the kind of remote monitoring of therapies. So that's maybe a code you should look into. So we have RPM for patient monitoring and physiological data, RTM for the actual non-physiologic data, but it's for adherence and other kind of technologies that support the patient with management of conditions. So going back to Medicare Advantage, I think like Susan had alluded to, these are capitated plans. So basically they're being administered by the major payers in the United States. They're getting a kind of large sum of money, they're getting X number of people within a population, and they're being told to manage that population, and they're at risk, for poor management. So in some way, the incentive for them, different to fee for service, which was all quantity driven in terms of you get paid for what you deliver. Here, the real goal on the providers and the payers is how do we manage this population effectively in a way that we can realize improved health outcomes, but not spend as much money in the process. And that's where we have this Medicare Advantage offering greater flexibility about what you can do. And if you look on the bottom table there, you can see of all the plans in 2021, 73% of them covered telehealth. That's a really high number compared to what traditional or original Medicare covered. I think before COVID hit, only 1% of Medicare beneficiaries were receiving telehealth because there were so many restrictions around its use. And now we're seeing 73% of these Medicare Advantage plans offering it as a benefit. And it's part of this goal of keeping people in home and community-based settings rather than bringing them into more formal care settings to receive services. And as I mentioned, Medicare Advantage at present has about 24 million individuals. And by 2030, all 50% of Medicare beneficiaries will be under Medicare Advantage. So it's a big transition, both in terms of service delivery, but really a major transformation in terms of the payment mechanisms that are going to be associated with managing and delivering care to an older population. I just want to finish up a report I did last year, which was for a foundation here in California, the California Healthcare Foundation, on remote patient monitoring and the safety net. And the reason I want to highlight this report is because Medicare is a federal government program. And so what Medicare, allows, everybody kind of follows. Medicaid is very different, as Kate alluded to, and the other speakers, is it's looking at kind of lower income populations and younger age demographic. So the issue is here when it comes to telehealth and it comes to what they will cover for, services delivered by telehealth, each state decides independently. So you've got 50 different decision-making entities about what their coverage policies will be. Unlike Medicare, you have one entity deciding. And obviously the health plans now under Medicare Advantage making their own determinations, but it's a major important distinction to think about in the population that you're addressing. So when I was doing this report this time last year, California did not cover remote patient monitoring. And we have a population of about maybe 15, 18 million people under the Medicaid program in California. Many of them with chronic conditions. We had COVID and there was no reimbursement for services. That's changing now. There's a lot of discussion going on within work groups and within the kind of California Department of Health Care Services about telehealth reimbursement, but nothing is definite. Nothing has been decided yet. But I think there's this growing momentum about we have to use more technology to scale services. And really, when you look at what Medicaid is interested in terms of, covering, why would they cover telehealth? Well, the number one reason is access. And the number two issue is about kind of, trying to manage their budget at a state level in terms of what they have to cover under Medicaid. So there are very different kind of decision-making criteria that they have. The important distinction, again, to make out is Medicaid in California and across the country is increasingly managed care. About 80% of California's Medicaid population are under managed care arrangements. They are not under like fee-for-service. And so it really does make a very big distinction in terms of what the payers and the providers who manage and kind of deliver on those managed care plans, will include as a benefit for the individuals that they are responsible for. So there's a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great technologies out there, and I'm just going to finish there because we have 2 minutes, but just wanted to give those clarifications and distinctions for you about digital health and the different payers on the public system side.
Thanks, Andrew. That was absolutely amazing just to hear what's been going on. And I think one of the things that's come up on this this webinar and this workshop is that things are moving and changing dramatically. And obviously, telehealth and remote monitoring need to be covered. And there seems to be some really good push in the right direction. Just one quick question that did come in from Kenichiro. How can technologists, how can tech get revenue from existing codes such as RPM, CCM, or RTM for future? Will it be a reimbursement share model splitting reimbursement between clinics and the manufacturers? So I think that's kind of piggybacking on the previous discussion that Regina mentioned, that there were these kind of opportunities to share the efficiencies. So
yeah, I think, I think, you know, like just taking most payers, you know, the populations they're most interested in are the ones that are most difficult to manage, and the ones that are kind of, what we would say preventable utilization. And for example, those are people who are frequently hospitalized for a single condition, like they end up in the ER and then they're being hospitalized, but with better care management that may have been prevented. There are, you know, so we're look at the populations who are, if you look at healthcare spending and you look at chronic conditions, the per capita spending on specific populations, you know, that's where the payers. And so when you talk to them, you're really trying to align your technology solution with who they want to reach and engage and activate in their own care. And looking at a lot of digital health technologies is more the business case that you build around that and show the effectiveness for it being able to do that.
Yeah. That is fantastic. Well, you know, we have covered so much today, and I know it's a little bit overwhelming maybe for some folks who are just being introduced to all the changes that are happening in reimbursement. I know that we probably will get a bunch of more questions over the course of the next few days, but please feel free to reach out to us. Myself and Andrew will be happy to take care of whatever questions and obviously work with the other panelists. I think this is kind of just dipping our toe in the water, to be honest. I feel like there's actually an opportunity to do a follow-up webinar. And we would love to hear back from everybody who's listened in. You know, what did you find valuable? What did you feel like you wanted more information on? And we can definitely work with you through the GAH program to make sure that you are as up to date as possible. There is huge opportunity here. There's a lot of opportunity for some of the great technologies that we've been working with from Japan. We know that the Japanese have definitely a strong interest in the aging technology space, and we have been working with many of you and are pretty amazed at the quality of the technology and how it does solve a lot of the issues that the aging community have. Andrew and I have both been working on a number of these. So thank you for your participation today. I know that we've run out of time, but we appreciate the fact that you will also get a copy of this recording from Jetro. So they will make sure that you get access, and hopefully if there's anything you missed, you can also have a copy of our slides, and I will make sure that Yuki gets those in the next day. Okay.